Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Hey everyone, it's Jesse Green here. Welcome back to SavvyDentist.com and to the Savvy Dentist podcast. It is wonderful to have your company for another episode of the show. Now today we're talking about the role of leadership as you grow your practice. And of course, if you want to have any level of growth in your practice, you're going to need to build a team, and that's going to require leadership skills. And I'm joined today by an expert in that field. Professor Martin Bean is the head of the Bean Centre, and his career is rich and diverse. He's worked for large government organisations, he's worked for universities, he's worked in huge private enterprises such as Microsoft. And today we're going to be unpacking all of the lessons of leadership that he's uncovered throughout his career and make them really practical for you in your dental practice. So, Martin, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Jesse, it's a pleasure to be here, and hello to all of your podcast listeners or those that might be watching us on YouTube.
Well, mate, thank you for taking the time. I'm grateful that you've made the time. And speaking of YouTube, I can't not remark upon the wonderful channel you've built there. And for anyone listening, I'd really encourage you, if you want to learn about teams, if you want to learn about leadership, please head across to Martin's YouTube channel. It's stacked full of goodies, and I've had the good fortune of listening to a lot of that content. Martin, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your background, because it is quite an interesting background. And how did you find your way into this space of running a think tank, talking to lots of high-level leaders, building high-level teams? You know, it's not something that most people put on their career form when they're 17. How did you find your way into this work?
Yeah, and thanks for the question. So, I started out at quite a young age at Monash Uni studying economics, which was a terrible fit for me, Jesse. But whilst I was there, I ran into just a wonderful global student association called ISEC that is all about, it was sort of founded out of the Second World War, and it was all about that lasting peace would come through economic and business collaboration, not through politics or war. And so they ran a graduate exchange program all around the world in 70 countries where people got to work from sort of 6 weeks to 12 months in other countries, really young. So anyway, I got involved in that, and that I ended up running that nationally, and then I got elected to run that out of Brussels in Belgium. So at a very young age, sort of at 20, I was running a team of 12 people from 9 different countries as a UNB status organization in Brussels. And as you could imagine, my career just sort of took an acceleration point. But when I got back to Australia after doing that was a limited time post, I really realized my great passion was education. So I went back as a night student at University of Technology in Sydney and finished off my Bachelor of Adult Education, and then got into the world of executive leader development. And in those days, back in the 80s, Jesse, we would run 1 week and 2 week residential leadership programs where we would help mid-level leaders and executive leaders. We'd sort of take them apart with some sophisticated psychometric materials, and then we'd put them back together. And you can imagine we all lived together for a week or 2 weeks. It was very immersive. It was a very different time back then, pre-personal computer. But then I jumped into technology through sheer accident. So when personal computers arrived, the head of the consulting practice walked in with one and said, "Does anyone know how to use this?" I was the only person that knew how to use a personal computer. We were the distributor for some American training software packages. And so I got into that world, and that took me off to the United States for 15 years, 3 American daughters, with my last tour of duty running global education products for Microsoft out of Seattle, which was really quite extraordinary, with about nearly a $2 billion revenue line, $2 billion US in doing that. So that was great. And then the unthinkable happened. I got contacted by the UK's largest university to become their vice chancellor. The headhunter reached out and said, "You need to come run this university." And so I did something that's very unusual. I jumped from the commercial world into the academic world, which was, I'm just so glad that happened in my life. So I did that. That was a university that largely catered to working adults, 270,000 students, all leveraging technology. And I needed to help them sort of embrace the internet and the social web. And I was very happy in the UK doing that. Life was good. And then after 30 years away from Melbourne, my hometown gave me a call and said, why don't you come back and be the Vice Chancellor of RMIT University in Melbourne? And so the circle closed, Jesse. So I came back and I got to be Vice Chancellor, which is academic speak for the chief exec of that university. And that was sort of 90,000 students, 10,000 staff. And loved it. Operations in Singapore, Vietnam, and China, in addition to Australia. And I was doing that, but I always had this goal, Jesse, at the end of my career to have the preferment stage of my career. So now I'm in my preferment stage, which is I only work on things I prefer to work on, which I wish upon all of your listeners, but I've been planning it since my 30s. So I'm still a professor at the University of New South Wales. But I now run my own think tank where I specialize in the future of work, the future of leaders, and increasingly the disruption in the world of work, which by definition disrupts what leaders need to do to be able to be effective. And of course, that disruption is just accelerating. And so a lot of the work I do now is helping leaders and organizations embrace disruption and use it as a force multiplier rather than going defensive and running away from it, which is a recipe for disaster, Jesse.
Wow. Well, let me just say that is perhaps one of the most accomplished CVs that I can think of. That is a rich tapestry of things I'd like to talk about. You started the conversation by talking about leadership in the 1980s and that immersive experience where you brought people together and you unpacked them with some psychometric evaluation, then put them back together. I wanted to ask this question just to set some context perhaps, and that is, how do you think leadership has changed from the 1980s in those days to today? Do you think leadership is essentially the same? Are we thinking about it similarly or differently? Obviously, the environment that we're working in is very different, but leadership as a concept, how has it changed?
Yeah, so undoubtedly, as you just touched on, the externality of leadership is massively different. And if I was to sum it up with one word, it would be pace. The pace is relentless now. So, literally, I remember the days where a letter would arrive into the office and it would go in an in tray and you could sit and look at it for a couple of days and think about how you would respond. Then you could write a response and post it. And then there was the assumed it could take a couple of days before it got there. So imagine leading in that environment. Imagine leading in an environment where it wasn't second by second. I have to respond to this SMS, this email, this Slack message, this, notification on my phone within 30 seconds. You actually had days to think, reflect, and act. The reason why I bring up that backdrop is leadership was really quite different. So there was a lot more room for you to be able to reflect, spend time. It was accepted that it could be more physical, face-to-face, immersive. Learning wasn't a library of digital content that you'd subscribe to that people were expected to do in their sort of part-time. There was a real commitment to leaders having a responsibility for growing and developing the next generation. So I think a lot of the core capabilities of what makes an effective leader have remained the same. But I think the operating environment that they have to deploy them is markedly different. And of course, the pandemic, although these things were alive and well before the pandemic accelerated the disruption of the world of work. And so it's left leaders with outdated toolkits for how to lead. And part of what I'm doing is helping them build the new ones. I will say though, Jesse, one thing that's having a renaissance is the human element of leadership, values-led, authenticity, vulnerability. That is having a renaissance because in a world that is so supercharged by technology and pace, what is cutting through, particularly for young people, and a lot of your listeners will be increasingly taking younger generations of practitioners into their practices. What lights those people up is really values, authentic, vulnerable leadership. And a lot of the leaders that are failing with younger generations, whether it's the Gen Zs or the millennials, are the ones that don't recognize that. And so they're sort of running an outdated playbook that is more of a mechanistic playbook, when actually what they should be doing is bringing the humanity to the foreground, Jesse.
You spoke about in earlier times the opportunity to reflect and to think about how you might respond to a particular situation, but with the rapid change of technology, the pace always accelerating. I wanted to ask you about the impact of this instant communication on the ability to reflect, and clearly the time frame to respond is shortened, but what's been the impact of that from a leadership perspective? Obviously, leaders might be feeling under pressure, and I imagine there's levels of stress around that, but in terms of effectiveness of leadership, I'm wondering if you could speak to that for a second.
Yeah, and the book we published late last year, we actually redefined leadership to being changing from thinking of leadership in hierarchical or managerial ways, and instead reframe it as being the coach that your people need.
Yeah.
So what we're missing out on is really the ability to take the time to dial into the whole person. I bet there's very few of your listeners today who haven't really struggled to find and retain great people in their organization over the last 3 years. I bet it's like one of the greatest challenges is finding and keeping great people. Well, one of the casualties of this pace is that it's putting leaders in a position where they're not prioritizing enough time to really dial into the whole person, understand what brings them joy, understand energy, understand what their development goals are, understanding how they need to be engaged to bring their best self to work rather than just almost dialing it in. I'll do the minimum I possibly can to keep my job. And so I think that's probably number one, is that, and again, it's often it can be blamed on the pace, but it's often because we as the coaches aren't prioritizing it. We're not prioritizing every Friday afternoon to think about all of the people in our practice, where they're at, what's going on for them, where they're struggling, where they're doing well, and then taking on the responsibility Monday morning as the coach to do whatever we need to do for those people so that this week they maximize their potential for themselves and for our business. That's been the biggest challenge, I think. People have confused productivity or getting things done with leadership, and they're two very different things.
I wanted to just talk about that for a second. One of my philosophies has always been that the ability of an organisation to help people become their best through training, the ability to take someone who's a relative rookie and have them become proficient in their role as quickly as possible, I think is a competitive advantage in today's marketplace. But that's all great to say, but you've got to have the right environment, the right resources, the right structures in place. So I wondered, from your experience, having worked with lots of organisations, large and probably seen some smaller ones as well, what do you see as the practical steps that need to be put in place for businesses to kind of take that on and succeed with it?
Yeah, so first of all, it's got to be a commitment to a learning culture, and that not being words on a page.
Yeah.
That is really a commitment. A commitment from the owners of the business or the leadership team of the business to really celebrate being a learning culture, and see that not as a nice to have, see it as a must to have. It's interesting, isn't it? Because for a lot of your listeners, they wouldn't think twice about staying up to date on being a dentist, right? It's just what you've got to do to be competitive. And yet we often overlook the need for us to bring the people in our organization along for that ride as well. Everybody, not just those on the clinical side, but those on the professional side as well. So that'd be number one. Number two is you've got to be prepared to commit the time to it. And I would imagine most of your listeners are time poor.
Yep.
They're trying to be a practitioner whilst running a business, whilst having an active social and family life. They're time poor. So when they think about committing time to building teams, having knowledge transfer, helping people grow, helping people develop, it's not a natural instinct to say that that's a high priority. So often what happens is it's a nice thought at the beginning of the year, but it never really plays out. It's never really built into the timetable of the practice. There aren't blocks of time carved out to focus on development, team, ambition, getting people enrolled in the vision for where the business is going, all the things that make great teams. So that would be number two. And then the third would be failing to recognize that the very best learning that can take place is the learning actually in the setting of the workplace, where you create a psychologically safe environment for people to admit where the gaps are, to ask for help, to coach each other, to create peer-to-peer learning. There's sort of this sense that it's got to be expensive and you need somebody from the outside to do it. Some of the very best learning and development is peer-to-peer driven. It's actually, we each take it upon ourselves to help develop the others. So off the top of my head, Jesse, those would be the things that I think get in the way.
Yeah, and again, I really appreciate that, because I think creating that learning environment by design, I think, is really, really critical. And having that as part of the DNA of the business, and in our case, the DNA of the dental practice, I think is really key. I've got a couple of clients to do that exceptionally really well, and the results of doing it well are quite phenomenal.
Yeah, engagement and retention. Even if you looked at the cost of turnover in a dental practice, right, you actually really add that up, it's horrific. When you actually add it all up, so, and if you look at the evidence is people will reward organizations that invest in their development through commitment and tenure.
Yeah.
And so even if you did want to bring it back to a return on investment argument, having a learning culture and being committed to being a learning environment is actually the smart thing to do as well, to attract the best people and retain the best people.
Yeah. The whole concept of mapping what an organization can give its people to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's really interesting, that learning and development and constant advancement and people investing in their future really does play into meeting those human needs. I just want to shift gear for a second, because you mentioned something a little while ago about leaders and authenticity and the value of authenticity and vulnerability. And I'm on the record for saying I'm a card-carrying member of the Brené Brown fan club. Loved the TED Talk. It was amazing, right? But authenticity is a word I just want to hone in on for a second, perhaps a little more than vulnerability, but we can go there. One of the things I've found with authenticity is it seems to be a word that can be misused. And I'm all for one being authentic in themselves, but sometimes I've found that people have this view that I'm just this way, take it or leave it. So I wanted to ask, where does authenticity, I should say, go from being useful and valuable to being a bit obnoxious?
I think when it's about you, it's obnoxious. When it's about you helping others to understand what motivates you as the leader, to inspire them to follow you, that's when it's really powerful. Okay. But if you are using it selfishly, as you described, as a way of just dismissing people, brushing them off, doing the my way or the highway, then that's manipulative. That's power. That's not what I'm talking about with authenticity. So one of the exercises I take chief executives through, and this would relate so well to sort of the head of practice of the listeners that are running the practices, is actually deeply reflecting on what it is. What are those deeply held values that are deep inside you, that are driving you to want to be successful in your profession and for the business? And how do you go about in one of those development sessions to just bring that to life for everybody else in the practice? I just thought it might be useful for you to really understand why I'm doing this. What's driving me? What is that underlying values that light me up to want to work with all of you and create this business that we're all a part of? And by letting people dial in to what are those deeply held values, that when everything else is stripped away, it'll be the things you'll fall back on to sort of guide you. Magic happens. I do this exercise often in front of their direct reports, groups of 8 to 10, but recently I've been doing it in front of their broader senior team. So you've got 80 or 100 people in the room. And it's not just the words, it's the stories they tell around the words. And when they open up about that, wow, it's just, it has this magical, motivating impact of people. A few light bulbs go off. Oh, that's why they act this way, or that's why they act that way. But it connects people to what's authentically driving you. So when I had to take RMIT through COVID and we had to cut nearly $300 million in a year out of the budget, it was just a horrible time I had to look at my team and say, look, I just want to level with you. The three things that are driving me to want to get this university through it are care, courage, and mateship. And I told a story about each of those values that, as you could imagine, it was just before lockdown in Melbourne. We weren't about to see each other again for months. But by me being able to very authentically explain to them why I was willing to do it, and then giving them the space to share why they were willing to come along for the ride, it connected us around that vision through horrible times in ways that we never would have stayed together if we hadn't been prepared to be authentic with each other. So that's what I'm talking about, Jesse, when I say that.
How do those two interact with one another, the vulnerability and the authenticity?
They do go hand in hand, and it's quite stress relieving because once you've sort of got it out there and you realize your job as a coach is to set up the enabling environment, not have all the answers, boy, it lifts some weight off your shoulders. So as the coach, you're there to make sure that everybody in the practice can be their best.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you need to know everybody's job or how to do it. In fact, quite the opposite. Your job is to make sure that you motivate them for them to want to own and take on more responsibility and make improvement. I bet for your listeners, one of their greatest challenges is that they're being stretched from pillar to post, and everybody wants them to do everything. And what they really want is to have people to step up and shoulder more of the responsibility and take on more of the tasks and the innovation in the practice. Well, a really great way you can do that is by being vulnerable and looking at people and saying, I have absolutely no idea how to solve that problem, but I trust you to be able to go away and figure that out. And I would love it because I need to learn from you how that new booking and reservation system interacts with an AI agent to help take patients' records before they even arrive at the practice, making all of that up. But you sort of get the gist. So sometimes relieving yourself of the pressure of thinking that you have to have the answers and you know how everything works and being vulnerable about that, it actually sets you up to be a much better coach.
Yeah, I really love that. And by the way, I don't think you're too far off from the AI-enabled records ahead of time, which does lead me to want to ask you a bit about your time at Microsoft. My observation is that Microsoft is going through somewhat of a renaissance. Under the leadership of Satya Nadella.
One of my heroes, yep.
Yeah, and he's almost, to me, like the Microsoft version of Steve Jobs. And I could be wrong. I don't know either man well enough to make that comment. But just in terms of the loyalty that they seem to inspire, the bold vision that they've set for their companies. And I wanted to ask you, what is it about Satya Nadella that you see as being really tremendous leadership qualities?
Yeah, wow, boy, we could spend definitely an hour on this one, but I'll headline it for you. First of all, he's an adaptive leader. So he doesn't run away from the challenge, he runs towards it. And in doing so, he expects mistakes and he sees mistakes as opportunities to learn from his people. If you look at his early responses to generative AI, he dialed up the risk tolerance faster than anybody else. He looked at it and said, there is no perfection here. There is no getting it right. There is only grabbing hold of it and running and coming at it with the right set of values and business principles. But we're going to actually put stuff out that is imperfect, folks, because it's the only way we're going to be able to get it done. So he's an adaptive leader. And by definition is courageous. He's an experimenter. But you know what's also really interesting, Jesse, and I've sort of got this from some of my former colleagues inside Microsoft. He made one cultural shift in Microsoft that worked wonders for the workforce. And it's a shift that any leader can make no matter what size organization. In my day at Microsoft, you would get an exceed rating in your performance, and which was worth a lot of money to you if you got an exceed. But it was all about personal, what I had done. So all I needed to evidence against really well-written objectives was what I'd done. And he walked in, having been a long time Microsoft employee, and he said, I'm going to change it now where, yes, it'll still be important that you can show your personal impact, but you can only get to be an exceed now if you can bring the evidence into the room of how you have helped others be successful.
Wow.
And almost overnight shifted the culture from being incredibly competitive, I've got to win against you, to suddenly realizing that winning was about how I can support you. And it might sound really strange or easy, but I've got to tell you, in an environment like Microsoft, where you're up against some fierce competitors, where technology is moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour, the more you compete with each other inside rather than competing outside and pulling together as a team, it's just worked wonders for that organization.
Okay, well, that sounds tremendous in the Microsoft context, because in a small dental practice, maybe we're not getting huge amounts of money with an exceed attached to it. What's the lesson there for small businesses? What's the lesson there that people go, okay, let me just take that and make it practical?
Yeah, so it's got to be, in my opinion, doesn't matter what size organization, teams matter.
Yeah.
And teams don't happen. Teams don't happen because a group of people suddenly are on the payroll and they sit adjacent to each other, which is often what happens in a practice.
Yep.
Teams get built. And I've watched small businesses and I've watched medical practices, and I've seen some of the most complicated political intrigue and games of thrones played inside small medical practices than I've seen anywhere, like inside a large organization like Microsoft.
Yes.
So I think that the lesson is culture, values, building the team, building a psychologically safe environment, and paying as much attention to collaboration as you do to business performance will create much, much greater success. And there's typically inside a small practice one or two other critical leaders. There's often the person that is running the trains on time for the practice.
Yep.
And then there's the person running the clinical side.
Yep.
A weak link often is we haven't trained and developed and selected the right person to be the right leader on the operating side, nor have we necessarily ensured that we're building a one team approach to everybody in that practice.
Yep.
And the customers recognize it. The customers recognize it, and it does not build loyalty, nor does it build satisfaction. When I go to my dentist, I look forward to going because it's a great group of people that build each other up. They support each other. They treat me well, and I can see their values are patient-centric.
Yeah.
And I've been in other environments where I'm a number, pure and simple. So you'll never get to that more values-led, patient-friendly, patient retention type environment unless that is reflected in the way they see the team working together.
From the business owner's point of view, how nice it'd be to have some other people on the team shoulder some of the load. And I wanted to talk about discretionary effort. What are the things that prevent or hinder someone from offering their discretionary effort? And then secondarily, how do we create the environment where people are willing to give more of themselves than the job description outlines?
Yeah, and it's one of the biggest, I touched on it earlier, but one of the biggest differences, generational differences that the literature is picking up on is exactly what you're talking about. So if you take the characteristics of what the Americans say Gen Z, we would say Gen Z.
Yes.
There's this phenomena that gets talked about now, which is passive resignation.
Yeah.
Which is if you're not engaging them in the right way, they'll just do the bare minimum. They'll show up, they'll do the bare minimum to keep the job, but you will not get that discretionary effort that you need in a small business to really excel. And so I think the only way, but the bit that I don't think is generational is the bit about helping individuals attach what they do to the greater mission or vision for where you want that enterprise to go. And having a leader that they believe in, who they feel cares about them, cares about the whole person, and cares about developing them and helping them build the career that they want to have. And so three core things I would say if you want to create that environment where people want to bring the discretionary effort. First of all, you've got to be prepared to get them all aligned around a common purpose, a common set of goals and objectives, and make that compelling. The story around that has to be compelling. You have to invest time and effort in building a collaborative environment, collaborative values-led environment. And as we talked about before, you've got to instill a learning culture where everybody feels they're being developed everybody feels that they're not standing still. They're part of an organization that is actually helping them grow and develop, so that wherever they may go next, they feel like that they are being accelerated in their life or their career by being in that role, which brings me sort of back to why the leader of the practice really should be thinking of themselves as a coach rather than a boss.
Yeah, I love it. In the Bean Centre, you deal with large organisations, right? Like big, like you're dealing with government departments, large institutions. When you talk to those leaders, and you might be talking to chief scientists of defence material or whoever it might be, right? What do you wish that they could learn from small business owners? And equally, what do you wish that small business owners could learn from someone like that?
Oh, what a great question. So the leaders in the big organizations could really learn from small business humility, the ability to, even though you might be an expert in your field, which often, for example, dentists are, well, always dentists are, when you're running the practice, you sort of have to put that to one side and be prepared to roll your sleeves up and dig in across the various elements of the business.
Yeah.
And I also wish that leaders of big organizations had to feel the pressure of cash flow and payroll.
Yeah.
The way that smaller businesses do. Because if they had to feel the pressure of cash flow and payroll the way that small business owners do, they might respect the money in their budgets a bit more. Yeah. And they might actually spend it a little bit wiser to return owner or shareholder value, because there is a lot of waste and a lot of unnecessary, indulgent expenditure in large organizations, and somebody pays the price for that ultimately. So that if I turn that around off the top of my head, I think what small business owners could learn from larger organizations is much more that commitment to the development of people, that human capital that we talked about. You know, larger organizations, and you can say, well, they can do it because they've got more scale and they've got the ability to invest in big HR teams and learning and development teams. But the really good ones are also fundamentally committed to it as a business imperative. They realize they are only as good, particularly in a services business, they are only as good as the quality of the people that they have to operate their business or to drive the innovation they need to stay ahead. And we have joked about it a little bit, but generative AI will have a massive impact on dental practices.
Yes.
Do we know what that looks like yet? No. Yeah. But if you're not thinking about it now, you're already too late, because your competition is, and you're going to miss out on something that will create incredible opportunities, but will also create challenges. A learning culture will already be embracing that. And so I think small businesses need to learn that they can't be so totally consumed in the delivery of what they got today that they're blind to the next two horizons of innovation that they need to be thinking about before they arrive, Jesse.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's really powerful. Really powerful. I guess the other thought that came to me as you were sharing that is those large businesses were once small businesses, and they've been able to grow to become large businesses. And for those people listening to this podcast that may want to go on a similar journey, there's some lessons there.
Oh, yeah, there are. But one tip I give, there was a wonderful professor at Harvard. His name was Clay Christensen. He wrote about disruption.
Strategy.
Have you heard of Clay? Awesome.
Strategy, yeah.
Awesome. And I miss him. I knew him as a person, and he was such a wonderful man. But what was interesting, if you look at some of Clay's lessons that he's left us with, my favorite is the new entrant nearly always wins. So for those listening that have ambitions to go big, wow, you need to make sure that one day you won't wake up like we did for a while at Microsoft and suddenly have turned into the very thing that you set out to destroy, because you've become so bloated and bureaucratic and you're trapped in the the tyranny of conventional wisdom. You're actually blind to the very things that got you started in the first place, that got you going in the first place. And, you know, when some of your listeners will remember Netscape.
Yes.
We took out Netscape at Microsoft, but guess what? 5 minutes later, Google took us out.
Yeah.
Right? So why? Because the new entrant nearly always wins. So for those that have the ambition, it's even more important that they're thinking Horizon 2 and Horizon 3, because if they get stuck, then the new entrant's going to beat them hands down.
How do you remain top of the crop? So, for example, practice goes big. Yeah, obviously you're talking about focusing on Horizon 2 and 3. I get that. But when you say the new entrant always wins, as Microsoft, you knocked off Netscape, but as you say, Chrome came along and knocked you guys off. How could Microsoft have avoided Chrome knocking them off? Or is it an inevitability, do you think? Or what could they have done differently?
It's not an inevitability, but I won't necessarily talk for Microsoft, but what I've done that seems to be the only thing that has worked is you've got to have the courage to invest in starting up your worst nightmare competitor, because if you don't do it, somebody else will.
Yeah, okay.
So that's got to be an innovation sandbox. And so no matter how small the practice, there's got to be a place that you fund to invest time and money into building things that could be incredibly disruptive to the way that you are currently doing your business. I mean, I just pick one. I have no idea if it's accurate or not, but I seem to get x-rays every now and again when I go into my dental practice, right?
Yes.
Right now, I'd imagine the majority of those x-rays are being read by humans, probably the dentist in the practice. Actually, as most of your listeners will know, x-ray technology has moved on eons from that. Actually, having your co-pilot, to steal some Microsoft terminology, AI that's in the practice with you, that is actually, because it's got the time to go 24/7, being able to read all of those x-rays and give you the heads-up display so that you apply the human practitioner element rather than the diagnostic is just one really small example. But to actually have that invented somewhere in the practice by somebody who's got the time to really focus on it and research it and figure out what the best reason is and how much it's going to cost and how do we get the ROI out of that, because it might cost jobs in the practice or it might mean that I have to change what I do. The tyranny of conventional wisdom will blind you to innovation because you go into a defensive self-protection mode.
I love that. And I should tell you, that is not far-fetched at all. That technology is already here. It's already in practices. It's already being used. But is it being fully utilised? Is it being fully adopted? Are people seeing the opportunity it presents? Well, that's a different question, and I suspect different answers. Martin, I have really enjoyed today's conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I really feel like there's about 300 hours of conversation that I could talk to you about a billion things. But there's been so many wonderful pearls of wisdom, so many practical lessons as well that I think everyone who is a leader of a dental practice can and should pay close attention to. I guess what I'd like to just wrap up with, if I may, is just in terms of parting words. I wonder, given your wide-ranging career, that things like, as you said, 20 in Belgium, leading multinational team across different countries, huge range of experiences there. If you were a dental practice owner today, what would be something that you think would be really important for you to consider as you go about building, growing, scaling your practice?
Yeah, I think the first would be accept the externality of change.
Yeah.
Don't try to control the uncontrollable. Don't try to, if suddenly the federal government or the state government changes the funding system around you, instead of fixating on that and trying to control that or getting angry about it or pushing back on it, just simply say, well, we can't change that, so let's focus on what we can change.
Yes.
And let's double down on that. And I think for smaller businesses, that's even more important. It's even more important to just filter out the stuff you can't impact and focus on the stuff that you can. And the second one, Jesse, might surprise you a little bit, but I hope it won't. And that is that I think the leaders listening to this podcast, if they're not prioritizing self-care, they need to be prioritizing self-care.
Yeah.
Be alert to the costs of ignoring it, embed the habits that really, what Graham and I talk about, sort of fuel sort of your inner game, and try to place as much sort of value on embracing performance alongside well-being rather than just performance, because the threshold frequency of people running small businesses who are also practitioners is dangerously high. And so, they say the plumbers always have the leaky pipes. I think getting that balance right between the performance, not just for yourself, but for the people working inside your business as well, making sure that you get the right balance between performance and well-being.
Wise words indeed. Martin, again, from all of us here at the podcast and for all the people listening, I'm sure would extend a heartfelt thank you to you as well. But for me, I really appreciate everything you've shared today, taking the time, of course, but the comments, the thoughts, the wisdom, the experiences, really valuable. So thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for the time, Jesse. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast. For more episodes, go to drjessegreen.com/savvydentist. And to discover how to build a high-performance dental practice, visit drjessegreen.com and download the free report.